Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. So as with some previous episodes that have focused on specific tech releases or recent news events dealing with emerging technology, today we'll be looking at the recently announced platform from Microsoft. So earlier this month, Microsoft announced Microsoft Mesh, and this is the new mixed reality platform that allows people in different physical locations to join collaborative and shared holographic experiences on many kinds of devices. So for those of you wondering, this is not HoloLens. HoloLens is the mixed reality headset that has the attached smart glasses, which allows you to see the digital items or holograms on kind of the normal analog environment. So these terms might be a little bit confusing, but if we're going to be saying analog and real reality, this is kind of the environment, the reality that we're all experiencing from day to day. But when we're talking about a digital or virtual reality, those are obviously the realities or the environments or scenarios that are being created by and for these different kinds of headsets. So in contrast to HoloLens, Mesh is the platform that will enable collaborative experiences in mixed reality through the use of HoloLens, but also, actually quite interestingly, through a range of different virtual reality headsets, smartphones, tablets, and of course PCs. So you can kind of think with an example here of a new sports car design team, right? So they'd be spread across different parts of the world or different parts of the country based on our COVID era, working remotely. They'd be then putting on a HoloLens 2 device and working on the new vehicle design. So by using the headsets, they can all see the digital design of the car in front of them in their own living rooms. But with Mesh, they would then be able to see each other. And I think this is the really exciting difference that Mesh has to offer. If you still can't quite grasp the image, the vision, I'll put a link to the intro trailer, which I think does a pretty good job of explaining what the ultimate desire of Microsoft Mesh is. But I think also interestingly, Microsoft hopes that Mesh will be seen less as a virtual reality platform and more as a virtual meeting platform. It's kind of an extension of the Microsoft Teams that would, in essence, replace a physical conference room. And I think that this is also really important because Microsoft Teams has been one of the dominant Office suite platforms used by businesses more and more as COVID has forced us all to work remotely. So though already covered, I think it's a good idea to look at what the actual term Holoportation is, which is kind of one of the central ideas that's connected with Microsoft Mesh. So the first step will really be just using digital avatars. These are the ones that are being used in virtual reality experiences that portray us in virtual reality, but in this case, it'll be in the mixed reality space. However, really the ultimate goal with Mesh is something called Holoportation. This was actually first presented back in 2016 by Microsoft, and I think is where one of the kind of unique selling points lies for Mesh. So this is simply a 3D capture technology that will beam a lifelike digital image of a person into a real environment. Of course, using an augmented reality platform or headset like HoloLens 2. So this is different from the digital avatars that we all experience in virtual reality. It is a true digital self, or as Microsoft says, a photorealistic self-representation, complete with real-time facial expressions and full body movements. Though, of course, even in the introduction video, the quality and clarity of those digital selves is still not to the standards of what we see in sci-fi films today, but eventually the hope is, of course, to get there. So Alex Kipman, the technical fellow for AI and mixed reality in the cloud and AI group at Microsoft, had this to say about holoportation, which I think is a really good summary and kind of might get you a little bit excited about the vision of it itself. So he says, this has been the dream for mixed reality. The idea from the very beginning, you can actually feel like you're in the same place with someone sharing content, or you can teleport from different mixed reality devices and be present with people even when you're not physically together. So I think that, as we are all now getting to the point where we're all sick and tired of Zoom meetings or Skype meetings, this can really offer the kind of human connection that, of course, these very basic digital platforms don't offer, and that we are missing more and more in our socially distanced and remote era. So as a VR enthusiast myself, this has been perhaps the most exciting thing about VR in our COVID era. This is really the ability to have an immersive and engaging experience with colleagues, friends, or even family while being, of course, in different locations. And I think that this is especially important when it comes to the business world, where collaboration is really key to many different kinds of projects and ultimate organizations. This might really provide part of the solution for remote teams now and in the future. So one of the obvious benefits when compared to VR is that you don't necessarily need a dedicated part of your apartment or house to use it. So with VR, depending on your headset, of course, you are mostly confined to a specific open area, but of course still have the risk of knocking into things while you are fully immersed in the digital space. With Mesh, however, as with any other type of AR headset, the digital environment is actually overlaid onto your real analog space, which avoids this issue entirely. But these benefits also really lead to some potential pitfalls of the technology. The first and most obvious is how exactly are we going to be scanning ourselves into this mixed reality space to enable the holoportation that Microsoft talks about. So Mesh is just a platform. It does not offer a new hardware product that can make that required digital scan. To make holoportation work, especially in the early demos, an elaborate and quite expensive camera setup was actually required. So I personally can see that the similar kind of virtual reality digital avatars will really be the main use for some time for Microsoft Mesh. Though it's possible that the unconscious interaction with avatars and this holoporting of colleagues and friends will alleviate Zoom fatigue, as mentioned before, it's also equally possible that you'll end up with a headache, cramped neck, or some other kind of physical issue after wearing a headset for hours on end. I personally, if I'm going to be using VR, I don't do it for more than an hour because the headset gets really hot, your face gets hot, and the headset are usually a little bit heavier, so it's kind of like wearing a brick on the front of your head. So short durations are really the best use for the technology, at least as it stands today. And I think lastly, but certainly not less relevant, is of course the cost. So though Mesh will work on a range of headsets, tablets, and mobile phones, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, it seems that the best way to use it is still with the HoloLens 2, which goes for upwards of $3,000. That's 10 times more than the Oculus Quest, which has still VR options for collaborative meetings and events built into it right now. So what are some of my final thoughts on this? I think that the potential social impact of such a functional platform is something really straight out of sci-fi. And I think that this is really compounded by the fact that you would be able to explore the actual world with holoported friends. So we saw with the explosion of Pokemon Go back in 2016, the various and new social ramifications that came about due to a relatively simple augmented reality game. So some of these impacts included increased screen and internet use, traffic accidents, and even abductions. But also, on the positive side, it triggered curiosity and increased excitement of exploration, more time outside, and of course, social bonding between players. I think that with Microsoft Mesh's desire to have a more immersive experience, where you ultimately would be able to bring virtual friends along with you as you, say, go out for a walk, explore the world, or simply live your life, these social impacts will potentially be compounded both for the better and for the worse. So as with most of the technologies that are talked about on this podcast, I think it'll be really interesting to see how Microsoft Mesh eventually plays out and is used. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
The Automated Podcast.